Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. How are you doing, Jerry?
Hey, I'm doing great here today in Kansas. We're getting some nice weather, and it's a wonderful day for a podcast.
Yay. Well, this is a fun one. We're talking a lot about STEAM and STEM. For the holidays, it was really easy. When I had to get my nieces and nephews gifts, they all wanted Legos. They all wanted, and it was easy because they come in boxes and they come based on some of the themes of things that they're also interested in. So it kind of like pairs interests, which is really great. But I got to watch my nieces and nephews building, and it was so interesting to see the different ways that they approach. Some like to really just take out the instructions and go step by step. And then others don't want to bother with those instructions at all. So I love the attention to detail, the variety of learning styles that emerged through this. And I loved watching them. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today.
Absolutely. I was going to share that my son was a Lego maniac, and we would buy, he liked the Star Wars. We would buy the kits, and I think he felt compelled to create the kit the way it looked, but he always threw the instructions away. He never wanted to look at those. He would build that and say, hey, look, I made it. And then he was so excited to tear it down and start making what he wanted to make.
Okay, so both ways.
I thought that was incredible in and of itself. But I have one thing that I did not like about Legos.
Oh, I know.
As a parent, getting up in the night and stepping on one.
Doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel good.
They were all over the place because my kids loved Legos. Mm-hmm. And we have with us today Julian Gomez, who is he has worked with Apple. He's worked with Lego. And I actually met him at a cocktail party. And we were just talking about Legos, and we were talking about technology. And then I said, how does all this flow into education? And after we talked for a few minutes, I said, we need you on our podcast. He has so much to offer. Julian, I wish you would start out by telling us a little bit about your background. In reading your biography, it is so impressive, all the work you have done and the things that you have contributed. So welcome, Julian, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks, Jerry and Jamie. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about what I'm working on. But first, I wanted to advise you that the AMA actually has a way of dealing with stepping on Legos. Legoectomy.
They have
A Legoectomy is for removing Lego bricks from the soles of your feet.
Yeah.
Oh, that's hysterical. Oh my gosh.
Have you had a Legoectomy, Jamie?
No. I managed to do it with just my left hand, so.
Oh, that's great. Love it.
Oh, gosh. Terrific. So, yeah, let's hear about your background. It seems to be that you've been involved in a lot.
Well,
Yes.
I am technical, but I'm very interdisciplinary. And I was just telling Jerry, I think I've always been interested in learning about stuff. It was my 9th grade math teacher who drove it home that there was stuff in the world besides math class. And then I got lucky and ended up in jobs that were in different areas. And then my PhD program I did that in a lab, which was jointly run by the Colleges of Art and Engineering. That's Ohio State University, which is my background, actually. That's Mirror Lake on the campus. And in the lab, you would walk in, you don't know, there might be a film student, art history student. It was everybody all over the place. And I think this really drove home the value of interdisciplinary communication. And in fact, my dissertation was sponsored by a question from the woman I was dating at the time, which led to a general theory of 3D computer animation, which probably would not have occurred if I'd stayed in my engineering silo. Since then, I've branched out into different kinds of activities like, technical software production, but as well trying to understand the gist of what's meant when you do things that are not tangible. For example, a Lego brick, we can do that in 3D with a CAD CAM system or some kind of 3D modeler. But when I built the Lego 3D database, the instruction was to get the essence of Lego, not just the CAD of the bricks, but the essence of Lego, but the principles behind it. So there are ways of expressing intangibles, even though you're using a technical medium. And then afterwards, coming back to the US and working at some other areas, got seriously into learning and education and realized that if we bring together a whole bunch of different areas, then we create a confluence that's greater than any of them by themselves.
Absolutely. That cross-pollination of ideas and people and art and science, I think, is where it really happens.
Yeah, I think it's the heart of innovation, right? It's got to be, because
Yes.
otherwise, you're like you mentioned, Julian, we're working in silos, and we don't get to branch out otherwise.
And I think the best example of that is Leonardo da Vinci. He himself was all over all these areas. What could he have done if he had electricity? Imagine his output. So,
right. Julian, when we were talking, when I first met you, we talked a little bit about learning theory, and I was kind of shocked that you would bring that up. I didn't know. Is there a learning theory that goes along with Legos, or what can you tell us about that?
There is. I mean, the Lego product line roughly corresponds to Piaget's stages. But as far as I could tell, I'm not completely positive. It's just as far as I could tell, this was accidental.
And so, yeah, it just went right along with what teachers and educators learn with Piaget, but students were just kind of picking that up individually on their own then through Legos. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and I don't know how, because when Lego started identifying their different product lines and addressing the different age ranges, I don't know what the basis for them realizing they needed to do that, but they did a good job of it. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So what made, when I think of Legos, first of all, I guess because of my age, I think of the tactile components that they use, the bricks to build things. What made Lego decide that they wanted to go with technology and go online? Why did they depart from the tactile?
It was market share. Around 94, they had done a study to see why their market share was dropping and discovered it was due to computer and video games. And that's when they realized that they needed to address this by having some kind of digital Lego. What the phrase means, digital Lego, it's a pretty broad thing. And I was mentioning a couple minutes ago about intangibles. So they formed a core group, and the half a dozen of us looked at what would that mean? Okay, what areas would have to be addressed? What kind of development paths? What's it going to cost, and all that? And then they said, okay, do it. So we did.
So you were on that team that developed digital Lego.
Yeah.
Yes. What kinds of things did you have to think about to create that experience that they wanted you to create?
So my position at Lego was first director of the advanced technology group. And this got the effort rolling. Well, actually, first I was a consultant doing this pilot study. Then I went to Denmark to become director of ATG. And then after ATG was rolling, I moved into the chief scientist position. So my responsibility was to build this database. The effort at Lego was called SPU Darwin, or Special Project Unit Darwin, for evolution of Lego from plastic to digital.
Oh,
so
love that.
Darwin was organized to build a database, which would be the reference point for digital Lego. The database contained 3D models of bricks and sets. Mm-hmm. And I had 3 subgroups within my group. One group was to run all the computers, because we had massive arrays of mostly silicon graphics equipment. I had another group who was managing building the database. So that's where the IT technology came in. And 2 things I can tell you is that relational databases do not like Lego, and they do not like 3D graphics. They're built around things like names and dates and numbers, all that. And no, they didn't like 3D. So I had to find a technology which would support being able to do that. And the third area was the actual modeling, because Lego was still manual production of the molds back then. They were just starting to shift to a CAD CAM process. But I was, L3D was completely digital. So there had to be some way to shift that engineering path into something we could actually use on personal computers instead of these big SGIs.
Yeah, huge task.
Yeah.
Yes.
But between those three groups, we managed to get some bricks into the database and some models into the database, so that I was able in late 1998 to demonstrate to the heads of Lego that all this money they'd spent was, here it is, right there on the screen. So,
wow.
Very, very cool. You know, it's funny that, though, because it seems, yes, there were many different departments, you know, different groups, different disciplines that you had to have merge into this, but also, and you mentioned the time that the money that was put in, but also I know a lot of time when back in the 90s, this wasn't, you know, drag and drop a lot of these things that we see now. And it took, I actually worked with a scientific visualization team in 1994 for the military. I did an internship with Lockheed Martin. And so I got to be placed with at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. And it was amazing to work with that team. But they helped me create a video to visualize the seasons of the Earth, because I was teaching science then. And I mean, it took over, I think it was probably into 2 days to actually render the videos that I was making. So it takes a lot of time. It took back then a lot of time for this to be developed. But once it was, I guess this 3D element really just was obviously another dimension, literally, that could be leveraged, and another aspect of learning as well in that mode too. So. And then from there, I know you said you worked for Apple. So where did that fall in? And then how do all of these different areas come into play for you? How did they all merge together into innovations that you're working on?
So let me presage that by saying I realized a few years ago, it's almost as if my entire life has been funneled into learning about all these different areas and doing big things with them in order to head into what I'm doing now. Because what I'm doing now takes from all of those. So for example, working at Apple, QuickDraw 3D was to provide 3D graphics as a native part of the Macintosh, just like they had 2D graphics, even from the computer's inception. And from that, I learned about building APIs, because you don't just have it in the computer, you need developers to be able to make use of it to create their applications. And Lego actually rated me out of Apple. And in starting to build L3D, I realized, well, we're going to have this database, L3D. It needs to have an API and an SDK in order for developers to use it. And then it has to address both internal corporate concerns as well as their third-party developers, because there are going to be games and movies based on L3D. So that one thing about Apple is that it gave me some of the experience at making a system usable for other groups of people. But it also dates back to Macromind, because when we built Macromind 3D, we knew that our primary audience was animators. And that one I was more comfortable with, because at Ohio State, my primary audience was animators.
And when was this?
Let's see, I was at Ohio State from 80 to 84. So.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I wrote their animation system, which was actually fairly widely used around the world, called Twixt. And the technology then, I mean, what you did doing your scientific visualization, if you can imagine something that's even more primitive, like where you
I was going to say, it was like 10 years prior. Yeah. My gosh.
No mouses on the computer. So.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Oh, very tough. I love the way that all of these things that you have done in your past, you said they're all kind of coming together for the work that you're doing today. What is that work?
So what I want to do is fundamentally change how humans interact with technology. And if you think about it, right now you're used to a mouse and a keyboard. In computer science, we refer to that as WIP, which is Windows icons, mouses, and pointers. And this term came around in the early 70s after the late Doug Engelbart invented the mouse. Keyboards, of course, have been around for 150 years. And my position is that these ideas were great for this time, for their time, but now we're in this time, and it's 50 years later, and we need to do something greater. And this is where the more advanced technologies like AR, VR, MR, whatever you want to call it, come in, because we can now present things where people can have a somewhat visceral experience. And this is the critical part, because when you watch kids playing with Lego and you realize and associate those with Piaget stages, you realize they're going through those learning processes in the 4 stages. And what we're lacking when you use a mouse on a computer is all of that. There's nothing visceral there. You look at the screen, you move your hand, you look at the screen some more. Of course, you can go through some learning process on that, but it isn't the learning process that you developed as a kid growing up. You went through visceral experiences. You didn't learn how to climb a tree by looking at a web page, right? And of course, pilots don't learn how to fly a plane by looking at a web page. So we already know this, is that the learning process is more than just looking at a screen or a page or anything like that. So what I want to do is bring the advanced technologies back to the learning process so that we're not just looking at screens anymore. The key thing is that digital advanced technology lets us create tools and interfaces that can't exist physically. So if you think about a screen, it's an electronic analog of a page, and a page itself is an analog of scratching marks in the sand with a stick. Well, humans live in 3D. Why do we restrict our learning experience to 2D? We have now technology such as VR, AR to present things in actual 3D. Problem is, the technology companies who are doing this are doing it to sell their products. And we need an integrated base of doing this. And this is, again, where Piaget comes in, because we know what the physical child development process is. And we need to go through a similar kind of process in order to use digital technology. And from that, create tools there where we're not limited by physics. One of the big issues we had in building virtual Lego was what happens if you hold a brick out like this and you drop it, it's going on the floor. We already discussed this, right? Well, in virtual Lego, this doesn't need to happen. It could, but it doesn't need to. And the question is, well, what happens if it doesn't? Does that mean that your digital experience is now seriously differentiated from the physical experience? Well, there could be some utility to that. So it can go both ways. And same thing is that it can go both ways in the digital area, but we need to examine, well, if you're going to have it go this way, then what kinds of new processes does it enable? Since we're no longer limited to looking at pages, then can we make some use of this advance that was only science fiction before? So this is what I'm working on.
A lot of theory of action involved for you to make these determinations. I think this is so incredible. And I really appreciate the fact that you're trying to dig deeper. You're not just trying to get that surface experience, but you really want that learning theory to be involved so that it makes sense for the future. And so that it doesn't have to be these 2 different worlds. We can have this immersive learning experience where the 4 stages of learning are part of this process and the experience, and still have this modernized way of learning as well. I love that.
Me too, and I love that he never quits thinking about what's next. Yes. As I listen to him talk, I think, Julian, you're a Renaissance man.
Yeah.
He has so many things going on and so many ideas.
I'll keep that in mind the next time I stub my foot in the door. So.
Yes. Yes. You were telling me earlier that there is another part of Lego that you are always excited about, and that is the Lego conventions. What happens at a Lego convention?
So I need to throw in 2 terms here, which are AFOL and KFOL. This is an adult fan of Lego and a kid fan of Lego. And Lego actually formally recognizes these now. The fans of Lego have, in the last 20 years, have gone through these massive organizational efforts. And now there are different Lego fan conventions held around the world, actually. There's about 1 a month here in the US. And they talk about Lego, they play with Lego, they have activities designed for the kids. The thing that excites me the most is the exhibition, because if you can imagine a convention center taken up with Lego creations, and you're not allowed to build something out of the box. It has to be something designed and created. And the amount of things that you can see that are just all over the place. Let's see, there are books on building Lego, of course, but sometimes, and it doesn't matter whether you're 4 or 104, people they go to town on building these massive creations like, let's see, it was in Chicago. I saw a 747 model. It was about 10 feet long. It was built exactly to scale. And the Qantas Airlines loved it so much, they sponsored this guy's trip to Chicago to show it off. I've seen a Batcave castle was about probably 8 feet high, and it went all the way up from Wayne Manor at the top down into the Batcave below. And I've seen kids put together 24 bricks, and yet they're completely able to express a bird. So what really thrills me about these conventions is the amount of imagination you get to discover just by walking around the convention center.
Yes. And are you someone that attends these often?
Yeah.
Or? Yeah.
The one here in Silicon Valley I go to every year, and I also help get it. I'm one of the organizers. So.
I've seen the White House and some of those Lego displays, and I'm just blown away. Do people actually plan it out on graph paper, or how do they get to that point?
Some do. There's one guy up here in Woodside who actually does a complete detailed digital plan before he builds a set. Mm-hmm. But there's another couple down in Boulder Creek who they just go at it. They know what they want and they just do it. So.
Wow. I love that. I love how they have different ways of attacking that. And I think it's so amazing because people do come from all over the world. It's such a, these huge events, and I can imagine the creativity. My nephew used to go. I've never been. Have you been, Jerry?
No, I would love to go.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, that's great. Seen some of the displays like at ISTE.
Yes.
Lego displays, and I'm always intrigued by them and think they are so amazing, so good.
Jamie just said something which needs expansion about people come from all over the world.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm hitting on in the work I'm doing now is that I want to build completely subjective experiences. Because right now, if you think about it, most teachers are overloaded. They get 55 minutes and 30 students, and they're supposed to deal with it. And some students learn like this, and some students learn like this, and you just can't deal with it. And when technology becomes cheaper and we can start building subjective experiences, and this means a lot of the differentiators start to disappear. Because if one kid learns something this way, and they get an experience which is tailored to how they do it, and another kid gets an experience which is tailored to how they do it, then this means that overall we have better learning, because all of the kids can then go through and learn things the way that they learn things. And we can't just say it's this or this or this. It's subjective. And this means that other barriers such as gender, race, culture are also going to fall away because it's subjective. So
that's a really good point. I mean, it really is and that is the best practice of education. But like you said, it's not always easy to do. So that's the trick. And I think that creating these experiences and allowing teachers to teach in these ways and helping them, guiding them is really the way to go. You're talking about all of these things that you're working on. How do you manage your projects, your innovations? I can just imagine your ideas. How do you pull it all together? Do you have teams to help you? What is your process?
I'm not sure.
I mean, it just seems that you have. Yes. You're so innovative, and you're such an out of the box thinker, and the things that you're trying to do seem to be something that is tackled over a long period of time. So, how does that work?
One thing is to not have a box. For example, I don't use any project management software because I consider that both a hindrance, it takes up too much time, and second, it silos my thinking.
Yeah.
That was an aha moment for me.
Yep. I like that.
I did too.
So
it's a good point.
I guess what I'm doing is I just mentally keep track of everything, but also I like to collaborate. And the pandemic's been a real burden because I haven't been able to get together with colleagues. But in following this philosophy of keeping interdisciplinary meaning, I don't have any feeling at all that I'm the only one doing this. So I have people to collaborate with, and they may want to work on one particular aspect of it or this particular aspect of it, but overall, there's sort of this long-term goal. And the professors that I'm collaborating with, they're of the same bent. They would like to see learning become something that students can deal with subjectively. And so even if they're only working on one part of this overall effort, then it's still good for the greater goal. So.
Yeah. So it's all about that collaboration. It really is. In order to move innovative ideas forward, there has to be, as you said, get out of that silo and connect with others, because it's through that discourse, that collaboration, where great things come about. But wow, okay, yeah, because it does seem that there needs to be a lot of attention put toward these projects and moving them forward. And I guess the key to success in that is continually working with others and brainstorming and moving forward with others as you go.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's great. Where are you located now?
Silicon Valley.
So you are in Silicon Valley. And then when you connect, you said you connect with different instructors at different universities. Who are other types of collaborators that you work with?
Well, at UMBC, one of the guys I went to grad school with is a professor, works in knowledge management, like big data sets and semantic knowledges, semantic webs. So he's working on one of my sub-projects is the history of computer graphics, because a few years ago, I came up with the concept of history as a graph database. And if you think of history now, it's presented in a serial way, and you're supposed to make all these connections. But in real life, history is everything everywhere. It's just all these things that cause something to happen. And to me, it was pretty obvious some years ago, okay, we're talking about a graph database. Well, this gets into the range of semantic technologies, such as if you've heard of RDF or ontologies, those kinds of subjects. So this is big. This is a big research topic by itself. So my colleague at UMBC is into this area and wants to work on particular aspects of the semantics of the history of computer graphics. I'm working with another professor at the Naval Postgraduate School who's likewise seriously into the semantics of 3D computer graphics, but also has actually been involved in some of the history efforts that I've done. So we're working together on trying to define one particular aspect of sort of the graph database equivalent of a schema for doing history of computer graphics.
Cool.
All right. Jamie, wouldn't you just like to be a fly on the wall in his office and see what all is going on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Fascinating.
It is completely.
And one other important one is one of my professors from Ohio State, Charles Surrey, who is a world-renowned artist. I mean, the guy has stuff hanging in different museums. I showed him some of the things I'm working on, and he was wondering how could I create art with this?
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
The business side wants to manage IT, right? But Chuck wants to create art. And as I said before, artists are the people who explore the most. So he wants to try, well, if I do this, and I can enable things that he was previously limited from doing. It's like when you paint a picture, right? You're limited by the fact you have a brush and you have paints and putting them on a canvas. Well, as Tilt Brush showed us, you can paint with light if you've got a VR headset. Well, what can you do beyond that, especially as you start harnessing the cognitive abilities humans have beyond this concept of putting paint on canvas? Because that goes back to the 2D analog. It's like Tilt Brush got us away from the 2D analog because you painted with light and space. And now let's go farther than that. And from that, as he explores, then some ideas are going to fall out that go back into creating the overall learning experience.
Can you give us some other examples of, when we're able to remove barriers, as you described, what are some other innovations, other ways of learning and doing that you are seeing in the near future in the work that you're doing?
Don't know about near future, but a few years ago when I was working with Tanzel, we could, in some of the small scale experiments, you could see that people were getting it. We had one that was showing like music generation. If you think about music, are you talking about the aesthetics of the music or the physics of, say, a vibrating string or the math describing the string vibrating? And really, you're talking about all of these. And Johann Sebastian Bach was a big proponent of learning the physics behind the process of making music with pipe organs. Right, so he was one of the early people getting into this subject. We had digital technology to assist us, and it's been really gratifying to watch people who've been classically trained on something, and well, not trained, but classically taught about something, but then say they'll put on a Google Cardboard and watch it in 3D with this visceral experience of being able to move their hand. It's like, oh, wow, I never realized that. And that it is so gratifying. So near term, I would say that we will be seeing lots and lots of little things where we harness this newer technologies and we'll hear this, oh, that's how it works.
Right.
Long term, we want to build up systems where educators can design curriculum units so that you will be, and while you're doing this business of, so that how it works is that you end up walking away after an hour having really learned something. This was what the startup Tanzil I was working at a few years ago was trying to go for. So.
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking, things created for teachers, but then you just mentioned teachers being able to be the creators. And that I think is going to be super fantastic too, because then they're going to be able to design, as you described, these subjective learning scenarios for that personalized learning environment that students really need. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Can I get on that point then?
Yes.
So as I was building the Lego L3D database, one of the issues I faced was how do I tell a database how a Lego model is being built? Because back then there was no technology. And I needed to know, well, this particular brick went here in the model, and then this brick went there, and this one. So there are different ways of sensing. I looked into all kinds of sensing, couldn't come up with anything really until we found a medical device called Sensible Technologies. And if you can imagine just holding a stylus, and as you move it around like this, it's changing where it is in space, it's changing which way it's pointing. So this device, the Sensible Technologies, would pick up and report that back to the computer. Most importantly, it had 3 motors. So as we were pushing a virtual Lego brick into position, the motors would push back on your hand and you would feel like you were shoving the Lego brick. So this is haptics, and it provided the secondary part of the experience of playing with virtual Lego. So otherwise it was just pictures on a screen. Right, but when you got this physical sense of pushing a brick or pulling a brick, then all of a sudden that bumps up the overall experience. And one day I was watching one of the engineers building a model and I realized, this is the digital toy that everybody wants. They want to be able to play with virtual Lego and have a good experience doing it. But the other thing is, it was the tool that I had built in order to enter Lego sets into the database. So it was an engineering tool. And, which was it? And there was no boundary whether it was a tool or a toy.
Right. Okay. So that is removing that boundary. And you don't have to have the Lego ectomy either. So, when you're in a virtual environment. So that's always a win-win right there.
Is that a challenge, Jamie? Should I come up with a digital version of Lego in the sole of your foot?
I think you need to. I think you need to. We just recently had a podcast on a team that was creating a virtual experience of the Richmond area, and they plan to do so with other cities as well. We have someone else coming on who is creating a virtual experience for Alzheimer's. Is that right, Jerry?
Yes.
And it's all about what you just described, that, I get it. It's building that empathy, but also that aha moment within, that Vygotsky says we need. So it's getting us to that level with these real environments that we can immerse ourselves in that are virtual. They are real yet virtual. So, so many different avenues, and it is just fascinating to me. It really is.
And the tip of the iceberg. It's just starting. But the common thread I hear as you talk is that you always have a dedication to education and educating people. Where does that come from?
I wanted to know that. Do you have an education background?
Well, I have been a professor and lecturer, et cetera.
Okay.
But I guess just my cultural upbringing is that you pursue learning. And the older I've gotten, then it's also, I realize that I need to be passing it on because at some point I won't be here. And I want to inspire future generations to do greater than I've done. A bunch of people have told me they read my dissertation and inspired them. One guy said he was so inspired, he moved from South Africa to Ohio State to get his own doctorate and keep going. And,
oh my gosh.
When you realize you've imparted enough of a desire to people to learn and go on and do even more, I think that's more what I'm going after these days. And I know it because of my background. I know I can build technology systems to try and push that. So
we are so happy that you are pushing your knowledge on to others, because you have done so much. And even before the show, Jamie, he was inspiring Marvin and I, because we were talking about the Legos and we both said, we might go out and get a set and be those AFOL, adult fans of Lego. Right. So, yeah.
By the way, I do not get a commission. So.
That's too bad. Julian, as we end our shows many times, we ask this question. Through all the work that you have done, and it's extensive, what has become clear to you?
So having watched previous episodes, I was actually prepared with an answer. And I would say it's connections. And you had somebody on a few weeks ago who was talking about connections. And I did learn linear algebra. Okay, what do you do with it? Well, then I got into 3D computer graphics and found out, linear algebra is the basis of that. All right, well, what about discrete set theory? Well, what do I do with that? Oh, okay, I can build a database of Lego bricks. And so technologically, scientifically, there's all these connections between different fields. But then also going through school and life, as you start talking to people and realizing, you talk to this person and maybe it's just a brief chat over coffee, but this idea, what if we took this idea and ran with it? Yes. So what I've found throughout life is that whatever you're doing, there's going to be connections somewhere. It was John Muir who said that whenever we try to touch something in the universe, we find that it's connected to everything else. And that's like the driving basis for my life is that, and you've got to be open to it, is that you think you're looking at one thing, but it turns out there are 16 other things that are connected to it. And a good portion of them might be pretty important.
And making a difference in the world, which you're doing. Amazing. So exciting. It really is. So we're going to follow your work and see where it leads. And, eventually we know it is going to be making a difference in the classrooms around the world, which is your goal, I know. So we're going to keep tabs, if you don't mind, and check in.
Absolutely. Are you on social media? Is there a place where people can follow you easily? Or do you have time for social media?
Not a whole lot. Let's see. I have a Twitter handle and I don't do Instagram. And I would be more likely to do something on YouTube, because one of the critical things for me is being able to do something in 3D. So I have a YouTube channel in preparation, but it's going to be using their VR component, not just straight video.
Right. Oh, yes. So that'll be great. That'll be great to kind of get connected to what's all happening in your brain and how you're on the move there. So that'll be fascinating too. Hopefully sooner than later, because I look forward to that. And then
keep up with us and let us know when that debuts. We would love to be a part of that. Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And this was a fascinating conversation. It is fun to hear from the people behind the scenes that make these things happen. It's just been wonderful.
Jerry, it's funny because there are some podcasts that we have that I think about for days. And then even weeks, and this is going to be one of them. And some I watched several times over. This is going to be one of them. So I got to take it all in again.
Right. There's so much there. Thank you so much.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to rant and rave.
We enjoyed it. It was our pleasure for sure.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.